You will, of course, be using the association's pre-approved and certified appraiser for your financial activities. We can't have just anyone assigning values in a community like ours. It's a matter of maintaining standards. The voice belonging to Karen, the self-appointed empress of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, was a thick, syrupy thing, oozing a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. She stood on my freshly manicured lawn, a floral print muumuu stretched taut over her considerable frame, her arms crossed as if she were holding the very foundations of the neighborhood together by sheer force of will. Her clipboard, the scepter of her suburban kingdom, was tucked under one arm. We were standing by my mailbox, the afternoon sun casting a long, distorted shadow of her behind me, a creeping stain on the perfect green canvas I'd spent all Saturday perfecting. The financial activity she referred to was my application for a home equity line of credit, a simple private matter between me and my bank, intended to finance the custom workshop I'd been dreaming of building in my backyard since I retired from the service. "His name is David Miller," she continued, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "He's very thorough. The board has vetted him personally. His fee is payable directly to the HOA, and we will remit payment to him upon satisfactory completion of his report." The implication was as subtle as a brick to the face. The HOA was the gatekeeper to my own home's equity, and she was the one holding the key. It was a power grab so audacious, so blatantly inappropriate, that for a moment I was speechless. This woman, who I'd seen berate a teenager for riding his skateboard on the sidewalk and measure a neighbor's grass with a ruler, was now trying to insert herself into my personal finances. The sheer unadulterated entitlement of it was breathtaking. She was dictating who I could hire for a service my bank required, and even more absurdly, acting as the paymaster. It felt less like a neighborhood association and more like a protection racket. My 20 years in the Army had taught me to recognize a hostile actor trying to establish a position of dominance, and Karen was practically waving a red flag. Her goal wasn't maintaining standards, it was about control, pure and simple. This is the kind of HOA nightmare that sounds unbelievable until it happens to you. If you've got a story of your own, drop it in the comments below. I want to hear it. And tell me where you're watching from. While you're at it, hit that subscribe button because you're going to want to see how this plays out. Now back to the battlefield on my front lawn. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind my drill sergeants taught me to take before wading into chaos. My wife, Sarah, had warned me about Karen. When we first moved into Oak Haven Estates 6 months ago, it seemed like the perfect place to finally put down roots. The houses were beautiful, the lawns were immaculate, and the quiet streets felt a world away from the dust and noise of the bases I'd called home for 2 decades. It was our forever home, the place we'd watch our future kids grow up, the place I'd finally get to be a husband and a neighbor instead of a soldier first. We'd received the HOA covenant, a binder as thick as a phone book, and like good soldiers, we read it. Most of it was standard stuff: lawn maintenance, trash can placement, no unapproved structures. We had no problem with rules. My life had been governed by them. But we quickly learned that the rules in the binder were one thing, and Karen's interpretation of them was another entirely. Our first taste of her reign came a week after we moved in. I was hanging a modest American flag from a bracket by the front door, the same flag that had been with me on my last 3 deployments. Karen had materialized out of nowhere, her golf cart humming to a stop at the end of my driveway. She'd informed me, with the gravity of a general court-martial, that the bracket was non-compliant. "All flag displays," she'd announced, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a laminated page from her ever-present binder, "must use the association-approved ground-mounted pole, specification 7B. You can purchase one from our designated supplier." She'd handed me a flyer with a picture of a flimsy-looking aluminum pole that cost an astonishing $300. I remember just staring at her, then at the flag in my hands, its familiar worn fabric a stark contrast to the glossy, corporate-looking flyer. I had calmly explained that this was a personal flag, not just a decoration, and that the placement was respectful and secure. She'd simply smiled that infuriatingly patient smile and said, "The rules are for everyone, Major." She'd made a point of using my retired rank, not as a sign of respect, but as a subtle jab, a reminder that my authority meant nothing here. In her kingdom, she was the five-star general. We'd fought it, of course, submitting a formal request for a variance, which was summarily denied by a board that, we later learned, consisted of Karen and two of her closest friends who rubber-stamped her every decree. In the end, to keep the peace, I'd taken the flag down, a small defeat that left a surprisingly bitter taste in my mouth. There were other skirmishes, a violation notice for leaving our garage door open for more than 60 minutes while I was unloading groceries, a warning about the unapproved color of the welcome mat Sarah had picked out. Each incident was a small, annoying power play, a constant chipping away at the feeling that this house was truly ours. But this was different. This wasn't about a welcome mat or a flag bracket. This was a direct incursion into my financial sovereignty. She was trying to wedge the HOA between me and my bank, using a manufactured rule to gain leverage. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "my bank has a list of licensed and bonded appraisers that they work with. I'll be selecting one from their list." She chuckled, a short, sharp sound like a barking seal. "Oh, no, that won't do. The bank's appraisers don't understand the unique valuation matrix of Oak Haven. They don't have our best interests at heart. David does. He knows what we expect." I stared at her, the name she'd mentioned, David Miller, clicking into place in my mind with a sudden, shocking clarity. David Miller. It couldn't be. The world suddenly felt very small. "And what, exactly," I asked, my mind racing, "do you expect from him?" Her smile widened, a predator sensing it had its prey cornered. "Just a fair, community-minded valuation, one that protects the integrity of our neighborhood." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. A valuation that she could control. A valuation that would serve her purposes, not mine. And as I stood there, looking at this petty tyrant in her floral muumuu, a plan began to form in my mind. A cold, clear strategy born of years of dealing with bullies and bureaucrats. She thought she was setting a trap for me. She had no idea she was the one who had just walked into mine. Because David Miller, the HOA's approved appraiser, wasn't just a name on a list to me. I knew him. In fact, on Saturdays he worked for me. The name David Miller echoed in my head long after Karen had hummed away in her golf cart, leaving a faint scent of cheap perfume and self-satisfaction in her wake. I walked back inside, the screen door clicking shut behind me, the sound abnormally loud in the sudden quiet of the house. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she unpacked groceries. She looked up, her smile faltering as she saw the expression on my face. "Don't tell me," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "The Queen Bee paid you a visit. What is it this time? Are our hostas planted in a non-regulation staggered pattern?" I managed a weak smile. "Worse. She's trying to get into our finances." I explained the conversation, the demand that we use the HOA's hand-picked appraiser, the absurd payment structure, the veiled threats about community-minded valuations. Sarah's face cycled through disbelief, then indignation, and finally pure, unadulterated anger. "She can't do that, can she? That has to be illegal. It's our house, our loan. The HOA has no standing in this." "I don't think she cares if it's legal," I said, leaning against the counter. "She's banking on the fact that we won't fight it, that we'll just pay the fee and accept whatever number her guy comes up with to avoid the hassle. It's a classic intimidation tactic." But the name was the thing that was really churning in my gut. David Miller. It had to be a coincidence. It was a common enough name. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The David Miller I knew, the one I called Dave, was a quiet, meticulous guy in his late 30s. He was a certified appraiser by trade during the week, but on weekends he moonlighted at my small engine repair shop. I'd started the shop as a hobby after retiring, a way to keep my hands busy, fixing lawnmowers and leaf blowers for people in the wider county area. Dave had answered an ad I put out for part-time help. He had a knack for diagnostics, a steady hand, and a quiet integrity I respected. He needed the extra cash to help care for his aging mother. Could Karen's David Miller possibly be my Dave? "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. She knew my quiet moods, the way my mind worked when I was analyzing a problem. "I'm thinking I need to do some recon," I said. "Before I launch a counterattack, I need to confirm the identity of the enemy's asset." I retreated to my small home office, the one room that was still more function than form, filled with unpacked boxes of military memorabilia and technical manuals. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the Oak Haven Estates HOA website, a poorly designed relic of the early 2000s that Karen probably thought was the height of technological sophistication. After navigating a few dead links and a truly painful number of pop-ups advertising the community-approved lawn care service, I found a section for certified vendors. And there it was, under the Appraisal Services tab, a single entry. David Miller, Miller Appraisal Solutions. There was a phone number and an email address. My heart began to beat a little faster. It was still just a name. I pulled out my shop's employee file, a simple manila folder with contact information and tax forms. I flipped to M. Miller, David. The phone number listed on his employment application was different from the one on the HOA site, his personal cell versus a business line most likely, but the name of his company, Miller Appraisal Solutions, was a direct match. It was him. My Dave. The quiet, unassuming guy who spent his Saturdays meticulously cleaning carburetors for me was the same man Karen was trying to use as a financial cudgel against me. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Disappointment, for one. Was Dave complicit in this? Was he a willing participant in Karen's little racket, taking kickbacks to screw over his neighbors? It didn't fit the man I knew. The man who had once spent an hour of his own time tracking down a rare part for an elderly customer's ancient tiller and hadn't charged him for the extra labor. But money could make people do things they wouldn't normally do. Then another feeling took over. A cold, sharp, strategic clarity. If Dave wasn't a willing participant, if he was being pressured or coerced, then this wasn't a problem, it was an opportunity. A massive one. Karen had unknowingly handed me the key to her own undoing. She thought she was forcing her chosen agent upon me, but in reality, she was sending in one of my own. I had an inside man. The entire dynamic of the conflict shifted in that instant. This was no longer a frontal assault I had to repel. This was now a counterintelligence operation. I closed the folder and sat back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet room. My training kicked in. Years of mission planning and risk assessment. I started mapping it out in my head. Step 1. Confirm Dave's position. I couldn't just call him up and ask if he was a crook. The approach had to be non-confrontational, designed to elicit information without revealing my own hand. Step 2. Assess his loyalty. Was he loyal to the extra cash from the HOA or to me, his other employer, and his own conscience? Step 3. If he was on the level, I would turn him. I would make him a double agent. We would play Karen's game, but we would play it by my rules. I would let her walk right into the trap she thought she was setting for me. The anger I'd felt on the lawn began to recede, replaced by a focused, icy calm. Karen had mistaken my desire for a quiet life for weakness. She had underestimated me. She saw a retiree who just wanted to grill in his backyard. She didn't see the man who had spent 2 decades outthinking and outmaneuvering adversaries who were a hell of a lot more dangerous than a power-drunk HOA president. She had initiated the conflict. She had chosen the weapon. But I was going to choose the battlefield, and I was going to rig it so completely in my favor that she would never see the defeat coming until it was far too late. The first move was to call Dave. I picked up my phone, but I didn't dial the business number from the HOA website. I dialed the personal cell number from my employee file. I'd call him not as a homeowner, but as his boss. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Hello? Dave's voice was exactly as I knew it from the shop, calm, a little tired, and unassuming. Hey Dave, it's Mark, I said, keeping my tone casual as if I were just calling to ask about the weekend shift. Got a minute? Oh, hey Mark, yeah, sure, everything okay at the shop? Everything's fine. Actually, I was calling about something else, a bit of a strange coincidence, really. I paused, letting the silence hang for a beat. My wife and I are looking to get a HELOC, and our HOA has a particular way of doing things. They're insisting we use an appraiser from their approved list. I heard a faint shuffling on the other end of the line, the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably. Oh, he said, and the single syllable was heavy with a caution that told me I was on the right track. And it turns out, I continued, my voice level, the only name on that list is a guy named David Miller, from Miller Appraisal Solutions. Any chance you know him? The silence this time was longer, more profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed the situation. He was trapped. He couldn't deny it was him, but admitting it would put him in an impossibly awkward position. Yeah, Mark, he finally said, his voice strained. That's me. I let out a slow breath. I thought so. Small world. I decided to press just a little to see what would shake loose. So, you do a lot of work for the Oakhaven HOA? Some, he said evasively. They send some business my way now and then. Right, I said. I could have confronted him then and there, demanded to know if he was part of Karen's scheme. But that would have been a tactical error. It would have put him on the defensive, forced him to choose a side immediately. My goal wasn't to corner him, it was to recruit him. I needed him to feel like we were on the same team. Well, look, I said, shifting my tone to one of friendly conspiracy. This is obviously a little awkward, but honestly, it might be for the best. At least I know I'll be getting an honest appraiser. I put a slight emphasis on the word honest, a tiny barb meant to gauge his reaction. He didn't respond immediately. I could picture him on the other end, probably running a hand through his hair, wondering what kind of mess he'd just stumbled into. When he did speak, his voice was low, almost a whisper. Mark, can I be frank with you? I'd appreciate that, Dave. This Oakhaven gig, it's not always straightforward. That was the opening I needed. How so? I asked gently. The president, Karen, she has a very specific idea of what property values should be. She believes that any improvements, any refinancing, it all has to be funneled through her. She wants to be kept in the loop, and she has expectations about the final numbers. Expectations? I prompted. She wants the appraisals to come in low, he blurted out, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. She says it's to discourage over-leveraging and protect community equity. But it's really about control. If the appraisal is too low, the bank denies the loan, and the homeowner can't do the project. It keeps everything looking exactly how she wants it. And she offered a bonus, paid by the HOA for reports that align with her assessments. Bingo. The smoking gun. It was exactly as I suspected, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of cold fury through me. She wasn't just a bully, she was actively engaged in a conspiracy to defraud her neighbors, using kickbacks to manipulate financial instruments for her own petty ends. And have you been giving her the numbers she wants? I asked, my voice flat. I held my breath. His answer to this question was everything. No, he said, and the relief in my chest was immense. God, no, I can't. My license, my reputation, it's all I have. I've been walking a tightrope with her. I give her a legitimate, defensible appraisal, and she complains. She threatens to take me off the approved list. So far, I've managed to hold her off, but it's getting harder. Honestly, Mark, I've been thinking about telling her to find someone else. The extra money isn't worth the stress. He sounded exhausted and genuinely conflicted. My gut feeling about him had been right. He was a decent man, caught in a bad situation. Dave, I said, my voice firm now, full of purpose. You're not going to tell her to find someone else. You and I are going to end this, but we have to be smart about it. What do you mean? I mean, we play her game. I'm going to officially inform the HOA that I'll be happy to use their approved appraiser. That's you. You are going to perform the appraisal, and you are going to give her exactly what she wants." A confused silence from his end. "Mark, I just told you I can't do that. A lowball appraisal would be fraudulent." "You're going to create two appraisals," I explained, the plan solidifying as I spoke. "The first one will be the official one you submit to the HOA and ostensibly to me. This one will be a complete joke. You'll put together a report that values my house at a number so absurdly low it's indefensible. You'll use every trick Karen has ever hinted at. Compare my house to distressed properties, ignore recent upgrades, anything you can think of to tank the value. This is the bait." "Okay," he said slowly. "And the second one?" "The second one," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice, "will be the real appraisal. Meticulously researched, fully documented, and 100% accurate. You'll prepare that one for me, and you'll keep it under wraps. You'll also document every single communication you have with Karen from this point forward. Emails, phone calls, in-person comments. Record them if you can legally do so in this state. If not, write down verbatim notes with dates and times immediately after they happen. I want a complete record of her attempting to influence a licensed appraiser. We're going to give her all the rope she needs to hang herself." There was a long pause. I could hear his steady breathing. He was weighing the risk. He was putting his livelihood on the line by conspiring against a client, even a corrupt one. "She's a vindictive woman, Mark," he said quietly. "If this goes wrong, she'll ruin me. She'll file a complaint with the state board. She'll slander my business." "It's not going to go wrong," I said with a certainty I felt deep in my bones, "because she won't see it coming. She thinks she's dealing with a retired guy who just wants to build a shed. She has no idea who she's messing with. And you won't be alone in this. I've got your back. When the dust settles, her threats won't mean a thing." Another moment of silence, and then a decision. "Okay, Mark," he said, his voice firm for the first time. "I'm in. Let's do it." The trap was now officially set. All I had to do was wait for the target to walk into it. The next morning, I composed a short, polite email to the HOA board, CCing Karen directly. It stated that after careful consideration of her recommendation, I would be pleased to utilize the services of their approved appraiser, Mr. David Miller, and I requested that she arrange the appointment at her earliest convenience. The response from Karen was almost instantaneous. It was dripping with smug satisfaction. "An excellent decision, Major," she wrote. "I'm so glad you've chosen to align with community standards. I will contact Mr. Miller and coordinate a time that works. I will, of course, be in attendance during the appraisal to ensure a smooth and accurate process for all parties." Of course she would. Her need to micromanage and oversee every detail was a core part of her pathology. It was also a critical error. Her presence at the appraisal would make her a direct witness to the fraud she was attempting to orchestrate, and I would make sure her every word and action was noted. The game was afoot. The day of the appraisal arrived cloaked in a humid, oppressive summer heat, the kind that makes the air feel thick and heavy. It was a perfect reflection of the atmosphere inside our house. Sarah was a bundle of nerves, pacing between the living room and the kitchen. "I can't believe you're letting her in our house for this," she whispered, peering through the blinds as a golf cart, Karen's imperial chariot, pulled up to the curb. "This feels like letting the enemy into the command tent." "That's exactly what it is," I said, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. "But the command tent is bugged, and the enemy doesn't know it. Just be yourself. Be polite. Let her do all the talking. She's the star of this show." Dave was scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. Karen, in her infinite self-importance, arrived at 9:45. She marched up the walkway, clipboard in hand, dressed in a garish yellow pantsuit that made her look like a giant, angry canary. I opened the door before she could press the bell. "Karen," I said, my voice a placid sea of neutrality, "right on time." "Punctuality is a cornerstone of a well-ordered community, Major," she chirped, breezing past me into the foyer. Her eyes immediately began darting around, cataloging, judging. "I trust you've prepared the property for Mr. Miller's inspection. A clear and uncluttered environment is conducive to an accurate valuation. We tidied up, I said dryly. Mr. Miller is a professional. I'm sure he can see past a stray magazine. Her lips tightened. She hated it when I didn't immediately capitulate to her pronouncements. Just then, Dave's modest sedan pulled into the driveway. He got out, carrying a metal clipboard and a large case with his tools, a laser measure, a camera, various forms. He looked the part. Professional, serious, and completely anonymous. As he walked up the path, I watched Karen's face. A proprietary smile spread across her lips. He was her appraiser, her tool. The dynamic was perfect. "Ah, David, good morning," she called out as I opened the door for him. "So glad you could make it." "Good morning, Karen Major," Dave said, nodding to me with a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes that only I could understand. He was a good actor. His expression was a perfect mask of bland professionalism. "Shall we begin?" Karen asked, practically rubbing her hands together. "I'll accompany you, of course, to answer any questions you may have about community standards and recent sales composites I've prepared." She brandished a folder she'd brought with her, no doubt filled with cherry-picked data to support her desired lowball number. This was even better than I'd hoped. She was handing him his fraudulent justification on a silver platter. "That's very helpful, Karen," Dave said smoothly, taking the folder. "I'll certainly review this." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in situational irony. Karen followed Dave through every room of our house, a constant buzzing presence. She was trying to influence him, but every word she spoke was a nail in her own coffin. In the kitchen, as Dave was measuring the new quartz countertops we'd installed, she sighed dramatically. "Such a shame the previous owners put in this kitchen. It's a very specific taste. Not at all in line with the more traditional aesthetic of the neighborhood. It will almost certainly have to be a deduct on the value." Dave just nodded, making a note on his form. "Noted," he said. In the master bathroom, where we'd put in a beautiful walk-in shower, she tutted. "You see, David, the problem with removing a bathtub is that you eliminate a whole class of buyers, families with small children. It's a net negative for resale value in a family-oriented community like Oak Haven." "I'll factor that in," Dave said, his face impassive as he photographed the pristine tilework. I followed them at a distance, a silent observer in my own home. My role was to be the subdued, slightly intimidated homeowner. I let Karen lead, let her feel the full weight of her perceived authority. She was so consumed by her own performance, so confident in her control over Dave, that she didn't notice the small, almost imperceptible details. She didn't see the way Dave's camera lingered for an extra second on the high-end appliances she was disparaging. She didn't see him making 2 sets of notes on his digital tablet, one under a file labeled HOA report, and another more detailed set under a file simply labeled Marshall. The pièce de résistance came when we were in my office. Karen's eyes landed on the framed commendations and medals on my wall. "All this military business," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "it can be rather off-putting to some people. It gives the house a very institutional feel, not very homey." I felt a hot flash of anger, a visceral need to defend the symbols of 20 years of my life, of sacrifices she couldn't possibly comprehend. But I caught Dave's eye. He gave me the slightest shake of his head, a silent command to stand down to hold the line. I swallowed my rage, converting it into cold, hard resolve. This woman wasn't just a busybody, she was contemptible. "I understand," Dave said to her, his voice betraying no emotion. "Aesthetics are subjective." He made a great show of scribbling a note. "Institutional feel, got it." Finally, after touring the entire house and the yard, where Karen pointed out that my planned workshop would ruin the sightlines from her friend's second-story window, the charade was over. We were back in the foyer. "Well, David," Karen said, beaming, "I think you have everything you need to compile a valuation that truly reflects the property's place within the Oak Haven community." It was a direct, unambiguous order. "Thank you for your input, Karen," Dave replied. "It was invaluable. You'll have my report within 48 hours. He turned to me. Major, thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Miller, I said, playing my part to the end. I walked them both to the door. Karen practically skipped to her golf cart, radiating a triumphant energy. She was certain she had won. Dave gave me one last quick look before he got in his car, a look that said, "We got it. We have everything we need." I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long, slow breath. Sarah emerged from the bedroom where she'd been hiding out. "I heard her," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "About your metals, about the kitchen. That woman is a monster." "Yes," I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. "She is, and we just recorded her entire monster monologue." The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to let the jaws snap shut. 3 days later, the first shoe dropped. An official-looking envelope from the Oak Haven Estates HOA arrived in our mailbox. It wasn't my copy of the appraisal report. Karen wouldn't be so direct. This was something far more insidious. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper embossed with the HOA logo. It was a formal letter, signed by Karen in her flowing, arrogant script. "Dear Major Marshall," it began, "this letter is to formally acknowledge receipt of the certified appraisal for your property located at 124 Willow Lane, as conducted by our approved vendor, Mr. David Miller. The appraisal has determined the current fair market value of your home to be $285,000. I had to read that number twice. $285,000. We had purchased the house for $450,000 just 6 months ago, in a market that had only gone up. We had since invested nearly $30,000 in the kitchen and bathroom renovations. A legitimate appraisal should have come in somewhere north of $500,000. This number wasn't just low, it was a fantasy. It was a valuation so divorced from reality that it could only be one thing: a declaration of war. The letter continued, each word dripping with condescending triumph. Given this valuation, which reflects certain unique characteristics and non-compliant updates that detract from the community's established aesthetic, any application for a home equity line of credit would be significantly impacted. Furthermore, based on this valuation, the Architectural Review Committee would be unable to approve any significant new construction on the property, such as the workshop you have informally mentioned, as the project's cost would be disproportionate to the property's assessed value and would represent a financial risk to the community's overall valuation. She had done it. She had taken Dave's phony manufactured number and immediately weaponized it, not only to block my HELOC, but to preemptively deny the very project the loan was for. She had overplayed her hand so spectacularly, so arrogantly, that I almost had to admire the sheer audacity. She had put her entire fraudulent scheme in writing and signed her name to it. This letter was her confession. I laid it on the kitchen table, a smile touching my lips. Sarah read it over my shoulder, her initial shock giving way to a slow-burning rage. "This is insane," she breathed. "She can't be serious. $285,000? That's less than the mortgage. She's basically saying our house is worthless." "No," I corrected her gently. "She's saying she is in control. This is the proof we needed, Sarah. This is everything." An hour later, a plain manila envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address, no postage. Dave had dropped it off personally, just as we'd planned. I took it to my office and shut the door. Inside were 2 items. The first was a bound copy of the phony appraisal he had submitted to Karen. I flipped through it. It was a work of art in its own way, a masterfully crafted piece of fiction. It cited dilapidated foreclosures from a town 10 miles away as comparable sales. It listed our new quartz countertops as laminate fair condition. It described our professional landscaping as overgrown in need of maintenance. Every lie Karen had whispered in his ear during the walkthrough was faithfully reproduced and expanded upon, creating a damning portrait of a house on the verge of collapse. It was the appraisal of a spiteful, malicious gossip, not a licensed professional. And at the end, the final, absurd number, $285,000. The second item in the envelope was another bound report. This one was thicker, heavier. The cover read, Certified Appraisal Report 124 Willow Lane, for client use only. This was the real one. I opened it, and the difference was night and day. Every page was filled with meticulous detail, high-resolution photos of our upgrades, detailed floor plans, and a market analysis that used 3 recent sales from within Oakhaven Estates itself, all of which had sold for over asking price. The report detailed the quality of the materials we'd used, the professionalism of the installation. It was a true and accurate reflection of our home, and at the end the number, $515,000, a difference of $230,000 from Karen's fantasy version. Tucked into the back of the real appraisal was a 4th document, a sworn affidavit from Dave. In it, he detailed, under penalty of perjury, the entire history of his interactions with Karen. He described their initial meeting where she'd laid out the approved vendor program. He quoted her offer of a bonus for appraisals that came in low. He chronicled her specific instructions during the walkthrough of my home, listing the features she told him to devalue. He attached copies of emails and a log of phone calls. It was a complete, irrefutable indictment of her entire scheme. I sat at my desk, the 4 documents spread out before me. Karen's threatening letter, the fraudulent appraisal, the real appraisal, and Dave's sworn statement. It was a prosecutor's dream. I had the crime, the weapon, the evidence, and the star witness. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't had to call in years. "Ben," I said when he answered, "it's Mark Marshall. I need your help. I've got a situation here, and it's right up your alley." Ben Jacobs had been the lead attorney in my unit's JAG office for 5 years. He was sharp, aggressive, and had an almost pathological hatred for bullies and abuses of power. After leaving the Army, he'd started his own civilian practice, specializing in real estate and contract law. When I explained the situation, I could practically hear the predatory grin spreading across his face through the phone. "Mark, my friend," he said, his voice alight with professional glee. "This isn't a situation. This is a gift. This woman has no idea the world of hurt she's about to enter. Send me everything you have, every email, every document. We're going to dismantle her piece by piece." I spent the rest of the afternoon scanning and emailing every piece of evidence to Ben. The violation notices, the emails about the flag, the flyer for the approved poll, and of course the 4 bombshell documents. As I hit send on the final email, I felt a profound sense of calm. The investigative phase was over. The counteroffensive was about to begin. Karen had built her little kingdom on a foundation of paper rules and petty intimidation. I was about to show her what it felt like when all of that paper was aimed back at her, not as a flimsy shield, but as a battering ram. Ben moved with the swift, decisive efficiency I remembered from our time in the service. He absorbed the mountain of evidence I sent him, and within 2 days had formulated a multi-pronged attack plan. "She's guilty of at least 4 things right off the bat," he explained over a video call, his eyes gleaming with a lawyer's battle lust. "First, tortious interference. She intentionally and improperly interfered with your prospective economic advantage, your HELOC. Second, breach of fiduciary duty. As HOA president, she has a duty to act in the best interests of all members, not to enrich herself or advance her own agenda. She's violated that spectacularly. Third, conspiracy to commit fraud. She conspired with a third party, or attempted to anyway, to produce a fraudulent document for financial purposes. And fourth, depending on how the money for her approved vendors is handled, we could be looking at embezzlement or misappropriation of HOA funds. This is a target-rich environment, Mark. His strategy was not to go after just Karen, but the entire HOA board. They're complicit, Ben argued. Either they knew what she was doing and are part of the conspiracy, or they were so negligent in their oversight that they allowed her to run rampant. Either way, they're liable. We're going to put them in a position where they have to choose between protecting her and protecting themselves. Guess which one they'll choose. The first step, however, wasn't legal action. It was social. "Before we drop the bomb," Ben said, "you need to build a coalition. You can't be the only voice crying foul. It's too easy for them to paint you as a lone disgruntled homeowner. You need to find her other victims." That weekend, I put on my walking shoes. I started with my immediate neighbors, the ones I had a nodding acquaintance with. My first stop was the home of the elderly woman Karen had berated over the color of her petunias last spring. Mrs. Gable was a widow in her late 70s who had lived in Oak Haven for 30 years, long before it even had an HOA. I found her tending to her now compliant HOA-approved white petunias, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I introduced myself properly and gently explained that I was having some issues with the HOA board and was wondering if she had experienced anything similar. It was like opening a floodgate. Her story poured out, a quiet tragedy of bureaucratic bullying. A few years ago, a hailstorm had damaged her roof. Her insurance company had approved the claim, and she'd hired a trusted local roofer she'd used for decades. Before the work could begin, Karen had swooped in, declaring the roofer unapproved. She insisted Mrs. Gable use a company from the HOA's certified vendor list. "The man she made me hire," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling slightly, "he charged me nearly double what my regular roofer quoted. I had to use my savings to cover the difference the insurance wouldn't pay, and the work was shoddy. The shingles started curling after a year." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a helpless frustration. But what could I do? Karen threatened to fine me every day the old roof was still on. I was so scared. I asked her if she still had the paperwork, the 2 quotes, the contract with the HOA's roofer. She did. She had saved everything, tucked away in a shoebox labeled "Roof Trouble." I told her about my appraisal situation without revealing all the details of my plan. For the first time since I'd met her, a spark of defiance lit up her eyes. My next visit was to the Rodriguez family, 3 houses down. They were a young couple with 2 small kids. Their crime? They had installed a swing set in their backyard that was a vibrant primary blue, a color Karen had deemed garish and out of character with the community's natural palette. They had been fined weekly until they finally repainted it a sedate forest green. Mr. Rodriguez told me how Karen had demanded they use an HOA-approved painter, whose quote for painting a simple swing set was an astronomical $500. They had refused, painted it themselves, and were then fined for unprofessional application of paint. They eventually paid the painter just to make the harassment stop. The stories continued. A family fined because their basketball hoop was left at the curb for 2 hours after trash day. A man who was told the native, drought-tolerant plants he'd installed to save water were unapproved weeds and had to be replaced with water-guzzling sod from an HOA-certified nursery. Every story had the same pattern: a reasonable action by a homeowner, an arbitrary and controlling intervention from Karen, and a resolution that always seemed to involve a vendor from her approved list, always at an inflated price. She hadn't just built a kingdom. She'd built a revenue stream funded by the intimidation of her neighbors. After a full day of walking and talking, I had a half-dozen similar stories and a growing list of neighbors who were fed up but felt powerless. They had all fought their individual battles and lost, worn down by Karen's relentless barrage of fines, letters, and public shaming. They had never realized they were not alone. That evening, I hosted an impromptu meeting in my garage. I invited everyone I'd spoken to. Mrs. Gable came, clutching her shoebox of receipts. The Rodriguez family came, along with 4 other families. I stood before them, a small but angry citizens' militia, and I laid out my case. I showed them Karen's letter with the fraudulent appraisal value. I explained how she had tried to coerce Dave, the appraiser. Then Mrs. Gable, her voice shaking but firm, told her story about the roof. Mr. Rodriguez told his about the swing set. As each person spoke, the mood in the garage shifted from individual resentment to collective anger. The air crackled with it. They saw for the first time the systemic nature of the corruption. It wasn't just them. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern of abuse, a deliberate scheme. She's been running a protection racket, Mr. Rodriguez said, his fists clenched. Pay her approved guys or pay her in fines. Either way, she gets a piece. So what do we do? Mrs. Gable asked, her voice quiet but clear. We can't fight her alone. She's too powerful. You're not alone anymore, I said, my voice ringing with confidence. I have a plan, and I have a very good lawyer, but I need your help. I need your stories. I need your evidence. We are going to present a united front that the rest of the board cannot ignore. I passed around a sign-up sheet and a stack of simple forms Ben had drafted, allowing him to represent them as a group. Every single person in that garage signed on. My small, personal battle had just become a full-blown community insurrection. The coalition was built. The next phase of the attack was about to begin. With the backing of my newly formed neighborhood alliance, Ben drafted the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. It wasn't a polite letter of inquiry, it was a 14-page demand letter and notice of impending litigation, addressed not to Karen, but to each member of the HOA board individually, delivered via certified mail to their homes. Ben insisted on this personal delivery. I want them to open it at their own kitchen tables, he'd said. I want their spouses to see it. I want them to feel the personal weight of this, to understand that this isn't some abstract association issue. Their personal assets are now on the line. The letter was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It began by outlining the core complaint. My situation with the appraisal. It referenced, with precise dates and times, Karen's attempts to influence a state-licensed appraiser. It attached as Exhibit A a copy of Karen's letter crowing about the $285,000 valuation. As Exhibit B, it attached the fraudulent appraisal itself. As Exhibit C, the real appraisal for $515,000. And as the knockout blow, Exhibit D, Dave Miller's sworn and notarized affidavit detailing Karen's entire scheme, including the offer of a bonus. The letter then broadened its scope, transitioning from my individual case to a pattern of systemic corruption. It detailed Mrs. Gable's roofing extortion, citing the competing bids and the inflated cost of the approved vendor. It described the Rodriguez family's swing set saga. It listed, in bullet point form, 6 other instances of what Ben termed vendor-based extortion, each one a story I had collected from my neighbors. He characterized Karen's approved vendor list not as a service, but as an illegal kickback scheme designed for the personal enrichment of its administrator, Karen, and potentially others on the board. The legal language was brutal and direct. It accused the board members of breach of their fiduciary duty to the homeowners, gross negligence in their oversight of the president, and conspiracy to commit fraud. It cited the specific state statutes they had violated, each one carrying the potential for civil and even criminal penalties. The demand was simple and non-negotiable. 1. The immediate removal of Karen from the presidency and any position of authority within the HOA. 2. The immediate dissolution of the approved vendor list and a full independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years, focusing on all payments made to these vendors. 3. Full financial restitution to all affected homeowners, including the difference in cost for coerced services, like Mrs. Gable's roof, and the reimbursement of all punitive fines, like the Rodriguez's painting saga. 4. For my specific case, the letter demanded the HOA formally expunge the fraudulent appraisal from all records except the legitimate $515,000 appraisal, issue a formal written apology, and pay for all my legal fees to date. The final paragraph was the hammer. It stated that if these demands were not met in full within 10 business days, we would proceed with filing a lawsuit against the HOA as a corporate entity and against each board member as an individual. The suit would seek not only actual damages, but also significant punitive damages for the malicious and fraudulent nature of their actions. The potential liability Ben outlined was well into the 7-figure range, a sum that would bankrupt the HOA and threaten the personal finances of every board member. The day the letters were delivered, a palpable silence fell over the neighborhood. The usual hum of lawnmowers and kids playing seemed to die down. I could feel the shock waves emanating from the homes of the two other board members, a retired accountant named Gerald and a real estate agent named Susan. They were Karen's loyal lieutenants, her rubber stamps. They were about to find out that loyalty to a sinking ship is a fast way to drown. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Is this Major Marshall?" a man's nervous voice asked. "This is Gerald Finney from the HOA board." His tone was a world away from the smug condescension I was used to from Karen. He sounded terrified. I received a letter from your attorney," he stammered. "I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all, Gerald," I said, my voice cold and even. "I think for the first time, things are perfectly clear." "Listen, I had no idea about any of this," he pleaded. "Karen handles the vendor relations. I just signed the checks she puts in front of me at the monthly meetings. I never looked at the details. The appraisal, the roofer, I didn't know." It was the classic defense of the willfully ignorant. I was just following orders. "Your signature is on the checks, Gerald," I said flatly, "and your name is on the letterhead. Negligence isn't a defense. It's an admission of guilt. You had a fiduciary duty to know. You failed." He was silent for a moment. I could hear his shallow, panicked breathing. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice small. "The demands are in the letter," I replied. "You have 8 days left to comply." I hung up. An hour later, I got a similar call from Susan, the real estate agent. She was more composed, but the fear in her voice was just as evident. As a real estate professional, she understood better than anyone how devastating a lawsuit for fraud could be to her career. "Look, Mark," she said, trying to sound like a peer negotiating a deal, "Karen can be overzealous. We all know that. But this lawsuit is going to hurt everyone. It will crater property values if this gets public." "Karen's actions are what's hurting property values, Susan," I shot back. "My property is apparently worth $230,000 less than it actually is, thanks to her. Imagine what a forensic audit of your books is going to do for buyer confidence. The best way to protect property values now is to clean house quickly and publicly." "We can't just remove her," she protested. "There's a process, bylaws." "Then I suggest you start that process immediately," I said, and hung up. The board was in disarray. They were turning on each other, trying to find a way to save themselves. The united front of the HOA leadership was crumbling, just as Ben had predicted. Karen, however, remained silent. I didn't get a call from her. Instead, she doubled down. The next day, a notice was posted on the community bulletin board and emailed to all residents. It announced a special emergency meeting of the Oak Haven HOA. The agenda item was singular: to address and refute the baseless and malicious allegations made by a disgruntled homeowner and to propose a special assessment to fund the legal defense of the association. She was going to fight. She was going to stand in front of the entire community, paint me as the villain, and try to force the very people she'd been victimizing to pay to defend her. It was a bold, arrogant, and incredibly stupid move, and it was exactly what I was hoping she would do. She was moving the battle onto open ground in full view of everyone. She thought it was her stage, but I was about to turn it into her execution. The night of the emergency meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. I'd never seen more than a dozen people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there must have been over 100. Word had spread like wildfire. The ominous legal threats, the rumors of corruption, the sheer drama of it all had drawn residents out of their homes. The air in the room was thick with tension, a mix of curiosity, anger, and anxiety. My alliance of wronged homeowners, Mrs. Gable, the Rodriguezes, and the others, had arranged to arrive together. We took up 2 full rows of seats near the front, a silent, unified blocks. I saw Gerald and Susan, the other 2 board members, sitting at the head table with Karen. They both looked pale and sick, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Karen, on the other hand, was in her element. She sat in the center chair like a queen on her throne, dressed in a severe navy blue suit, her face a mask of grim determination. She radiated an aura of righteous indignation, a woman deeply wronged and prepared to fight for her honor. She banged a gavel on the table, the sharp crack echoing through the silent room. "This emergency meeting of the Oak Haven Homeowners Association will now come to order," she announced, her voice booming with false authority. "As you all know from the notice, we are here to address a serious threat to our community. A campaign of baseless lies and personal attacks has been launched against your board and against me personally by one homeowner who is unhappy with the rules that the rest of us live by." Her eyes found me in the crowd, and she fixed me with a venomous glare. "Major Marshall," she said, her voice dripping with scorn, "has decided that he is above our covenants. When his plans for an unapproved and oversized structure were rightfully questioned, he chose not to follow the proper procedures for appeal. Instead, he hired an aggressive lawyer to threaten us with a frivolous lawsuit, hoping to bully his way into getting what he wants. She was good, I had to give her that, too. She was a natural propagandist, framing the narrative to make me the aggressor, the outsider trying to tear down their peaceful community. A few of her known cronies in the audience nodded along, murmuring their agreement. "These allegations," she continued, holding up a copy of Ben's letter, "are a work of fiction. The claim that I, or this board, would ever engage in any sort of financial impropriety is not only false, it is deeply insulting to the years of volunteer service we have dedicated to maintaining the value and integrity of Oak Haven." She paused for dramatic effect. "Therefore, the board is proposing a one-time special assessment of $200 per household to establish a legal defense fund. We must send a clear message that we will not be intimidated. We must protect our association from this malicious attack." A wave of murmuring swept through the room. $200. She was asking her victims to pay for her crimes. This was the moment. Before she could call for a vote, I stood up. "Point of order, Madam President," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry through the entire room. Karen's head snapped toward me. "You are out of order, Major. This is not a town hall." "According to Bylaw 3.4 of the Oak Haven Covenants," I countered, my voice ringing with authority, "any member may be recognized to speak on a matter of a proposed special assessment before a vote is called. I wish to be recognized." A frantic rustling of papers came from Gerald as he fumbled with the binder of bylaws. He found the page, his eyes went wide, and he gave Karen a panicked little nod. She was trapped by her own rules. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "Fine," she spat. "You have 2 minutes." "Thank you," I said. I didn't look at Karen. I turned and addressed the room, my neighbors. "My name is Mark Marshall. My wife and I bought our home here because we thought it was a wonderful community. We still believe it is, but a community is its people, not its president." I held up my own copy of her letter. "This isn't about a workshop. This is about this letter, which I received from Karen last week. In it, she informs me that my house, which I bought for $450,000, is now worth only $285,000. She calls this a certified appraisal." A gasp went through the room. People who knew the local real estate market looked at each other in disbelief. Now, you might be asking, how could a property's value drop by nearly 40% in 6 months in a rising market? Karen claims it's because of non-compliant updates. I call it something else. I call it fraud. "That is a slanderous accusation," Karen shrieked, banging her gavel. "He's out of order." "I have proof," I said, my voice cutting through her outburst. I held up the 2 bound appraisal documents. "This is the appraisal Karen is referring to, the one that says my house is worth $285,000. And this," I held up the other one, "is the real appraisal, done by the exact same man on the exact same day, which values my home at $515,000. Why the difference of $230,000? Because one was ordered by Karen and the other was ordered by the truth." The room erupted in a chorus of shocked chatter. "And how do I know that Karen ordered the low number?" I continued, my voice rising. "Because I have a sworn, notarized affidavit from the appraiser, Mr. David Miller, stating that Karen offered him a cash bonus to deliver a lowball number. He states, under penalty of perjury, that she instructed him on how to falsify the report." I held up Dave's affidavit. This isn't an allegation, Karen. This is evidence. Karen was on her feet now, her face purple with rage. Lies, all lies. That man is a disgruntled contractor. Before she could continue, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was Mrs. Gable. She stood up, frail but resolute, clutching her shoebox. It's not lies, she said, her voice trembling but clear. She did the same thing to me. All eyes turned to her. When my roof was damaged, she wouldn't let me use my roofer. She made me use hers. Her man charged me almost $7,000 more. I have the quotes right here. She threatened me with fines until I gave in. Then Mr. Rodriguez stood up. She fined us over the color of our children's swing set and then demanded we hire her approved painter for $500 to fix it. One by one, the members of my alliance stood up, each telling their own story of extortion and intimidation. The room was in an uproar. Karen's cronies looked stunned. The neutral homeowners looked furious. They were seeing the pattern, the web of corruption that she had woven around them. I turned my attention back to the head table, specifically to Gerald and Susan. Gerald, Susan, my lawyer's letter accused you of gross negligence. You claimed you didn't know. Well, now you know. Everyone in this room knows. So I ask you now, in front of this entire community, are you going to vote to spend our money to defend this corruption? Or are you going to do your duty and stand with the homeowners you swore to represent? Gerald looked like he was about to be physically ill. Susan stared at Karen, her expression one of dawning horror and betrayal. Karen, for the first time, looked cornered. Her bluster was gone, replaced by a wild, panicked look in her eyes. The crowd was turning on her. The people she had ruled for years were now looking at her with open contempt. "This meeting is adjourned," she shrieked, banging the gavel repeatedly, but no one was listening. A homeowner near the front, a lawyer I didn't know, stood up. "I make a motion to remove Karen from the office of president of the Oak Haven HOA, effective immediately for cause, based on the evidence of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty presented here tonight." "Second," shouted a dozen voices at once. The public exposure was complete. The insurrection was in full swing. Karen's reign was over. The motion to remove Karen as president hung in the air. A declaration of revolution in the stuffy clubhouse. Karen, sputtering with impotent rage, tried to shout it down. "This is an illegal proceeding. You can't do this. I am the president." But her power had evaporated. The authority she wielded was never real. It was a mirage built on the community's compliance, and the community was no longer complying. The lawyer who had made the motion, a tall man named Frank, took control of the room with practiced ease. "According to Bylaw 7.1, he announced, his voice projecting over Karen's protests, a board member can be removed for cause by a 2/3 vote of members present at a validly called meeting. This is a validly called meeting, and we have a quorum. The motion is in order." He looked directly at Gerald and Susan. "The motion is on the floor. As the remaining board members, it falls to you to call the vote." The spotlight was now squarely on Karen's two former allies. The entire room was silent, watching them. It was a moment of truth. They could go down with the ship, clinging to their loyalty to Karen and face a ruinous lawsuit, or they could cut her loose and save themselves. Gerald, looking ghostly white, was the first to break. He cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. I vote aye to remove her." One down. All eyes swiveled to Susan. She had more to lose than Gerald. Her real estate license and reputation were on the line. She looked at Karen, whose face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Then she looked out at the sea of angry homeowners, her clients and potential clients. Her survival instinct kicked in. "I," she said, her voice firm, "I vote to remove Karen as president." With the board's vote a formality but a powerful symbol, Frank turned to the room. "The board has voted in favor. Now we put it to the members. All in favor of the motion to remove Karen from the presidency and the board for cause, Please say I. The response was a deafening roar. I! It was a sound of catharsis, of liberation, years of pent-up frustration and resentment released in a single unified shout. All opposed? Frank asked. A handful of Karen's closest friends, maybe 4 or 5 people, remained silent, looking at the floor. One woman half-heartedly squeaked, "Nay," but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming silence. "The motion carries," Frank declared. "Karen is hereby removed from the board of the Oak Haven Homeowners Association, effective immediately." The finality of the statement was stunning. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face slack with shock. Then the reality of her public humiliation set in. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I built this community." "You preyed on this community," Mrs. Gable called out, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Now get out." Karen grabbed her purse and her now useless binder and stormed toward the exit, pushing past people without a word. As she reached the door, she turned for one last hateful glare at me. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the clubhouse floor. Then she was gone, disappearing into the night. Her reign of terror had ended not with a bang, but with a vote. In the aftermath, Frank, the lawyer, took charge of the meeting. He was swiftly nominated and elected as interim president. Susan and Gerald, eager to demonstrate their newfound commitment to transparency, immediately supported him. His first act as president was to formally table the motion for the legal defense fund. His second was to make a motion to accept all the demands laid out in Ben's letter. "We will immediately begin the process of removing Karen from all HOA bank accounts," Frank announced. "We will dissolve the so-called approved vendor list. We will hire an independent forensic auditor at the next meeting. We will work with Major Marshall's attorney to arrange full restitution for all affected parties. This board will now operate with full transparency." The meeting ended with a sense of dizzying change. People were talking, shaking hands, even laughing. The oppressive cloud that had hung over the neighborhood for years had lifted. The next morning, Ben called me. He'd already been contacted by a chastened Susan, acting on behalf of the new board leadership. "They've folded completely," Ben said, a note of triumph in his voice. "They've agreed to everything. They'll pay your legal fees, accept the real appraisal, and issue a formal public apology at the next meeting. They're practically begging us not to sue. They're also setting up a claims process for the other victims, which we will oversee." The settlement negotiations were swift. The HOA, under its new management, was desperate to avoid a lawsuit and move forward. They agreed to pay for a brand new third-party appraisal for my HELOC application, just to ensure absolute impartiality. They cut a check to Mrs. Gable for the full difference in her roofing costs plus interest. They refunded the Rodriguez family and the others for the fines and coerced vendor payments. They even established a new community-led architectural review committee to ensure that the rules were applied fairly and not as personal whims. The most symbolic moment of Karen's downfall came a week later. As part of the transition, she was required to turn over all HOA property, the records, the laptop, the bank statements, and most importantly, the keys to the clubhouse and the golf cart. Frank, Susan, and I met her in the clubhouse parking lot to conduct the handover. She arrived in her personal car, looking haggard and defeated. The arrogant, powerful woman from my front lawn was gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter-looking person who refused to make eye contact. She handed over a box of files and a set of keys without a word. When Frank asked about the golf cart, she just pointed to it. Taped to the steering wheel was the key. On the passenger seat, she had left behind her scepter, the infamous clipboard. I walked over and picked it up. It was still cluttered with violation notices and threatening letters she had yet to send. I unclipped the stack of papers, walked over to a nearby trash can, and dropped them in. It was a small, quiet act, but it felt like the definitive end of an era. Karen watched me, her eyes burning with hatred, but she said nothing. She got in her car and drove away. We never saw her at a community meeting again. Within a month, her house was on the market. The months following Karen's public dethroning were like a slow dawn after a long, dark night. The changes in the neighborhood were both subtle and profound. The constant low-grade anxiety that had permeated Oak Haven was gone, replaced by a sense of relief and a newfound spirit of cooperation. The new HOA board, led by Frank, operated with a transparency that was almost shocking. Meeting minutes were posted online within 24 hours. The budget was presented in a clear, easy-to-understand format. An online forum was established for residents to discuss issues openly without fear of retribution. The forensic audit of Karen's tenure revealed what we all suspected: a tangled web of overpayments to her approved vendors, with evidence suggesting that at least 2 of them were owned by her relatives. The audit also found that she had been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses, disguised as community supplies. The findings were turned over to the district attorney's office. While a criminal case would be a long and uncertain process, the financial and reputational ruin was punishment in itself. My own life returned to the peaceful rhythm I had craved. With the HOA's official blessing and a new, undisputed appraisal of $520,000, even higher than Dave's initial honest assessment, the bank approved my HELOC without a single issue. The groundbreaking for my workshop was a neighborhood event. Mr. Rodriguez came over with his 2 boys, who watched with wide eyes as the concrete foundation was poured. Mrs. Gable brought over a pitcher of lemonade, her smile wider and more genuine than I had ever seen it. Dave, my quiet co-conspirator, stopped by on a Saturday afternoon after his shift at my repair shop. We stood by the framing of the new structure, the smell of fresh-cut lumber in the air. "You know," he said, looking around at the peaceful scene, "I almost turned her down from the beginning. I almost walked away from the whole thing." "I'm glad you didn't," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "If you had, she'd still be running this place, and a lot of good people would still be getting hurt." "You took a huge risk, Mark," he said, "putting yourself out there like that." I looked over at my house, at the American flag now proudly displayed on a proper, self-installed flagpole next to the front door, one of the first rule changes the new board had made. "It wasn't a risk," I said. "It was a necessity. Some lines you have to hold, no matter what." The completion of the workshop coincided with the first anniversary of what the neighborhood now jokingly referred to as the Great Clubhouse Coup. To celebrate, Sarah and I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue. We sent out invitations to everyone, a simple flyer with the words, "Come celebrate the community we've built together." The turnout was incredible. My newly finished workshop, now filled with tools and the beginnings of a project car, was transformed into a serving area. The backyard was filled with dozens of families. The Rodriguez kids were playing on a new, brightly colored swing set. This one a vibrant rainbow, a defiant and joyful statement. Mrs. Gable was holding court by the flower beds, giving gardening advice. Frank was manning the grill, flipping burgers and talking with Gerald and Susan, who seemed genuinely relieved to be part of a functional, ethical board. I saw Dave there with his mother, both of them laughing at something Mr. Rodriguez was saying. He caught my eye from across the lawn and raised his glass in a silent toast. I raised mine in return. We had won more than just a battle against a petty tyrant. We had reforged a community. We had taken a set of rules designed to control and divide and turned them into a framework for cooperation. We had replaced a culture of fear with one of mutual respect. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the yard, I stood on my deck looking out at the scene. Sarah came and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "You're a troublemaker, you know that?" she said, her voice soft and full of affection. "You were supposed to be retired. Quiet life, remember?" I smiled, squeezing her hand. "The mission finds you, I guess. You don't always get to choose the battlefield." "Well," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "this is a pretty good battlefield to win." I looked at the faces in my yard, the sound of laughter and conversation washing over me. This was what I had fought for, both overseas and here, in this manicured patch of suburbia. It wasn't about the money or the workshop or the right to hang a flag. It was about the fundamental principle that your home is your sanctuary, and no one has the right to violate that. It was about standing up to a bully, not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't. Karen had tried to take my home's value, but in the end, she had only revealed its true worth, not in dollars and cents, but in the strength and resilience of the people who lived here. And that was a victory far more satisfying than any number on an appraisal report. The war was over, the peace was won, and we were finally truly home.